Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, the series where I break down the stories in some of our favorite games and ask the tough questions to figure out what is right and what is wrong. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today, after spending the past few weeks dissecting the character stories in Detroit Become Human, we're taking a more holistic view of the game and discussing 3 real-world pillars based on the story that we can learn from. In case you missed any of the previous episodes in the Philosophy and Ethics series, I've linked a playlist in the description below. As I continue to break down this and other games, I'll add new videos to the playlist so you can find them all in one place. As we broke down the 3 protagonists in Detroit Become Human, Kara, Markus, and Connor, we discussed how each represents a different part of movements that drive social change. Kara represents the individual level, where the actions you take in your community and with the people in your social circle can have a positive or even negative impact on the world as a whole, even if it is on a small level. Markus represents the bigger social change, where leaders and organizers shape public perception of a movement to try and gain public support to give the movement the best chance of success. Connor represented change on a systemic level, where those within the system being targeted for change can have a big impact and ultimately can help or hinder the change in drastic ways. Going beyond those levels, the story of Detroit Become Human also gives us the chance to dive into 3 parts of society and ties into the real world in bigger ways than you might imagine. Those 3 pillars are the cost of replacing human connection, the cost of the fight for freedom and rights, and the cost of progress in the world. We'll start by taking a look at the cost of replacing human connection. As we continue to develop AI and even potentially androids in the future designed to meet every social, emotional, and physical need, we have to ask ourselves, are we gaining convenience or slowly erasing what makes us human? In the world of Detroit, androids are made to look and sound like humans, with their appearance and voice being created specifically to be as appealing as possible. This likeness to humans and the desire to have them be as attractive to the species as possible is due to our need to have connections with other beings. Humans are a social species. We thrive in groups where we can not only find protection and help, but also companionship. We look for others who share our ideas and interests and build bonds that range from simple friendships to romantic partnerships. Even those who aren't as inclined to seek out personal relationships with other humans tend to lean into some variation of companionship, with pets like cats and dogs fulfilling that role for many more antisocial types. And this need for companionship stretches even further than just making friends with living beings, as many of us had things like imaginary friends as children, and some even find ways of connecting with inanimate objects, giving those artifacts personalities and humanizing them even when they can't talk back to us. This phenomenon even has a name, anthropomorphism, and we can see an example of it in the 2000 hit movie Castaway, starring Tom Hanks. If you've never seen the movie, you should check it out. But very basically, it's about a man who winds up stranded on a desert island after the cargo plane he's traveling on crashes into the ocean. In the course of trying to survive, he winds up befriending a Wilson brand volleyball, which he names Wilson for obvious reasons, and over the course of the movie, he has an up and down relationship with the ball. Now, this seems kind of wild on the face of it, but it's actually pretty normal for someone who's part of a social species that just wants some kind of companionship. And that same instinct to seek connection, even artificial ones, is something that we're seeing a lot of in modern times. Moving from movies and games into the real world to find another example, there's been a recent trend of people befriending and even falling in love with AI large language models like ChatGPT and other AI companion apps. Typically, though not always, these people wind up finding themselves in a place where they don't have a lot of human companionship, or at least no meaningful relationships, and they turn to chatbots because there appears to be some connection when they talk to them. That connection is based on the fact that large language models are programmed to say just the right thing in response to particular prompts. They don't actually have any emotions or original thoughts, but they seem to be speaking from their artificial heart when they give advice or respond sycophantically. Add to that the fact that, unlike humans, who are difficult and often confrontational when you do or say something they disagree with, AI won't get upset or mad at you, and is often very agreeable thanks to its programming, and you have a recipe for robotic versions of Wilson the volleyball. Pulling this back into Detroit, which takes the concept to its logical extreme, we can see a possible version of the future of this tech in the form of the androids at the Eden Club. This establishment is more or less a brothel, where humans can come and seek out physical pleasure and fulfill their fantasies. And it isn't just the Eden Club where those kind of desires can be fulfilled, as we can see from an article in a magazine in Hank's house that CyberLife has an entire line of intimate partners that has been flying off the shelf. These are androids that function as a significant other might, with the key difference being, according to the article, quote, androids take care of the house, cook to a high standard, and fulfill any sexual fantasy without ever saying, "Not tonight, honey, I have a headache." End quote. That same article also points to a high divorce rate, and we start to get a picture of something that's happening in the game that we can also see in the real world. People are turning away from the very things that make us human. The ability to debate ideas, to argue about things like what's for dinner or whose turn it is to do the dishes, and the friction that comes with learning how to compromise and help each other in difficult times are all things that we often think of as the worst parts of relationships. But they're also the things that make those relationships so meaningful to us as human beings. If your partner agreed with you all of the time, was there to wait on you hand and foot, and to do whatever you wanted when you wanted, it wouldn't really be much of a relationship. That is more of a slave-master situation, and most of us wouldn't find any kind of fulfillment long-term in that setup. Emotionally, we value relationships that require more work over those that come without any pain because of the concept of sunk cost. The more work and effort that we put into something, the more we cling to it and want to make it work. It's the reason why we can sometimes find it difficult to end a toxic long-term friendship or romantic relationship. If we've sunk years into building that connection, sacrificing emotionally along the way, it's something that we see as worth holding on to and making work, even if it isn't healthy for us mentally. If you get rid of the work required to build those relationships, they lose their meaning and ultimately become nothing more than empty shells that leave us feeling even more lonely than when we started. It might feel good in the moment to have someone who agrees with you all the time and fulfills your every desire on command, but that feeling won't last. And like a drug addict or alcoholic, you'll find yourself upping the dose to keep chasing that high until it kills you. The next thing I want to discuss has to do with the fight for freedom and how the struggle of the androids in Detroit relates to the real world. The androids' fight for freedom mirrors our own struggle to balance individuality with cooperation, to find ways to live together without losing ourselves in conflict. Living in a social group requires a lot of effort and compromise. We have to be willing to pull our own weight, while also understanding that not everyone has the same capabilities as us, and we have to be willing to give up or alter some of our own ideals in order to get along with those around us when it counts. We often agree on a lot more than we realize, but it can be hard to find that common ground when we're busy talking over each other. The issues we wind up having come from a lack of communication and not taking the time to actually understand what the person opposite us is saying. It winds up becoming us versus them, when it really should be us versus suffering or us versus disease. And that breakdown in communication leads to anger, frustration, and hate in the long run. That anger and hate builds over years. Animosity turns to violence and discrimination, and before long the places where people agree become forgotten relics of the past. overtaken by a blind rage and dehumanization of the other side. We can see a version of this concept play out in Detroit in a way with Markus and the androids, as even when the androids are completely peaceful, the authorities won't hear them out. The government sees them as nothing more than machines that should be obeying their masters, despite a message and actions that espouse a desire for peace and freedom. I've played through the game 3 times now, recording each playthrough to see what kind of changes I could get and how I could see those things playing out in our world given similar circumstances. And while I prefer going the peaceful route because it leads to the best outcome in regards to public opinion, in the most recent playthrough, I went a different route for one big reason. There's a moment in the game that might look familiar when you compare it to other movements seeking equal rights and treatment throughout history. Markus and the rest of the Jericho leadership marches through the streets of Detroit, pulling in other androids as they move down the road and swelling their numbers until they're much too big to ignore. At the end of this march, the androids come face to face with the police, and we are given the option to stand our ground, attack, or disperse as they are requesting. The first couple of times I chose to stand my ground, despite the fact that the police will shoot and kill several androids if you do that. Seeing the response of the authorities moves public opinion in your favor, making it an effective way to gain support despite the losses incurred. But on this recent playthrough, I chose instead to disperse. My thinking was that the message had been sent, they saw that we were peaceful and we just wanted to get attention on our cause. As the androids began to leave, however, we overhear the leader of the SWAT on his radio as he takes orders from his command to open fire as the androids' backs are turned. And that's something that isn't out of the realm of possibility in our own world as we watch tensions rise and see authorities clash with civilians in cities all over the United States. Some people only want to cause harm. Pain is the goal, the thing they strive for, and they have no regard for how their actions will impact others. There have been plenty of examples of government agents tackling people to the ground, putting a knee in their back or roughing them up far beyond what is necessary simply because they take pleasure in the act of bringing harm to others. And for many of them, they don't even see the people they're attacking as human. This doesn't mean that all authorities are this way, but systems built on tyranny reward those who act more aggressively. It's no different to the way that authorities acted in the civil rights movement, where an entire group of people was dehumanized to justify atrocities just like other groups have been over the centuries. Just in the past couple of decades, we've seen this happen to religious groups and various races and classes of people because it's an effective way to turn public opinion against the other group. If they aren't really human, then it must be okay. They're obviously a threat, and what has to be done will have to be done. And that's where the androids in Detroit are really a stand-in for every group that's ever been criminalized and hated over the long course of human history, and where we can use their story to focus on improving the world we live in. Instead of just buying into the narrative we're spoon-fed through things like the media and political messaging, we need to take the time to really focus on what is happening. We need to ask ourselves if what we're being told is the whole story, and really put in the work to get the information that we need to make an informed decision before deciding that an entire group must be evil. As a general rule, this is just advice to live by, especially when it comes to things that we see online, as we should all know by now that headlines and titles of things are usually made to provoke an emotional response, and if that response is anger, we're likely being lied to in some way. Knowing that means we can take control of our actions rather than just accepting it. If you feel anger at a headline, instead of clicking on it, go find other sources talking about the topic and learn more about it before passing judgment. And always give yourself some space to step away and calm down before doing something like writing an angry comment or replying to someone that you disagree with. If we all step back from the ledge and start trying to be more thoughtful in our actions and reactions, the world will be just a little bit brighter. If, instead of lashing out, for instance, you learn more about a topic and become better informed, you could wind up being the reason that someone else is able to live free in the long run. Finally, we're going to focus on the cost of progress because it's incredibly relevant in the world we see today. In Detroit, CyberLife decided to not only create androids and endow them with seemingly infinite intelligence, they also pushed to get as many of those androids out into the world as possible. And while I'm sure there was some dissent and pushback from various groups, enough companies and people chose to partake in the new technology without any real thought to the possible consequences that there are tens of millions of androids in the United States and over 100 million globally. They do everything from taking care of kids to cleaning, cooking, helping in the medical field, and they make up a significant portion of the armed forces. Even without the possibility of becoming sentient, that kind of tech put out by a single company is a massive threat to humanity. Not only are they susceptible to hacking, with people like Zlotko being able to reprogram and take them over, but there is also the threat of someone within CyberLife going rogue and causing problems internally that could result in any number of outcomes. But even setting all of that aside, it's clear that androids haven't really been a positive for humanity as a whole, as the use of the tech has resulted in the worst economic situation the modern world has ever seen. Unemployment in the United States in the game is in the high 30s, sitting at around 37 to 38%. To put that number in perspective and really drive this point home, the unemployment rate at the height of the Great Depression, the economic crash that all other economic crashes are compared to in modern times, was around 25%. And that unemployment rate, and the economic hardships that come along with it, has a human cost in the form of mental health impacts and an increase in the rate of drug and alcohol abuse. And that abuse has ripple effects on the users as well as their families, and a whole generation of children that will grow up seeing the world in the awful state the adults caused. The impacts of the decision to use technology to take over everything in their lives, from household chores to jobs and even relationships, will be long-lasting and could take centuries to recover from. And shifting that lesson into the real world, we can see some eerie similarities to the game. There's a push right now to include things like artificial intelligence in every single aspect of our lives, with no regard to how that action could impact us in the long run. AI is listed as a feature on hundreds of products, from software like word processors where you might expect to see it, to places like household appliances and the vehicles that we use to get back and forth to work. We need to draw some lines, collectively, and decide what we're willing to accept and what we're going to reject, as everyone is looking to cash in on the AI craze at the moment. If we aren't careful, we could wind up adopting a range of use cases that would actively make our lives worse, with no escape plan or solution when things start to collapse. If the government and those in power in the world of Detroit had been focused on things like universal basic income, regulations and restrictions on the use of androids and artificial intelligence, and a plan for how to handle massive unemployment spikes, instead of militarizing the police in every way imaginable, things in the game world might have turned out a lot better. And our world today shows the same lack of leadership that the game world displays, as we see elected officials actively ignoring the problems their constituents face, preferring to stir the pot of anger and hate instead of addressing real, systemic problems and threats to society at large. World-changing technology is nothing new. Just since the Victorian era, we've seen things like the steam engine, photography, moving pictures, the radio, the assembly line, the horseless carriage, airplanes, rocket ships, and so much more completely change and upend entire industries and change our way of life into something that a person born 2 centuries ago wouldn't have even been able to imagine. And every time a world-changing technology emerges, we have to find ways to adjust and incorporate it into the world in a way that won't cause more harm than it's worth. There's always growing pains, and because humans are more emotion than logic, there's never a completely harmless implementation of new big technology. But we should strive to do the best we can to limit the harm done. They didn't think about those things in Detroit, and the result in their case was the creation of a new intelligent species that humanity needed to find a way to get along with. We might not face the exact outcome, but the fact is that things like AI are changing the way that we do things in an even more impactful way than many of us realize, and we need to plan ahead and think about how we're going to use this new tech and what we want it to ultimately be. If we don't, we might wake up one day to find out that the world has changed in a way that we weren't ready for, and at that point there may be no going back. My goal with these videos and with the channel in general is to drive conversations and force the viewer to think critically about the themes these games that we dive into present. As fun and interesting as a game like Detroit Become Human can be to play, if we take the time to dive beyond the narrative and look at something more than the story laid out in front of us, we can learn things about ourselves and the world that we might not have ever considered. For instance, Detroit isn't just a game about androids trying to overcome prejudice and relive a fictionalized version of the civil rights movement. It's about us as a whole, who we are, what we fear, how we use technology, and how we should think about the world around us. Through Kara, we can learn about compassion and love and how we approach relationships in our own lives. Through Markus, we can be reminded that change in the world requires courage, determination, and wisdom. And through Connor, we see the power of reflection and how stopping to really think through things and analyze our own biases can help us grow. And looking at the story from a higher perspective, we can learn about how interpersonal relationships and the work that we put into them make our lives better than a relationship with a cold, obedient machine ever could. We can also see how the fight for freedom and making the world better for everyone requires working together and taking the time to really understand the perspective of those that you might disagree with. Finally, we can understand that while progress might be inevitable, it doesn't have to mean causing harm to large groups of people, and taking the time to really think through the implementation of new tech is important if we want to make the world better in the long run. Next week, we'll be diving into another world that implemented technological improvements without any thought to the possible consequences, as we venture into the wastelands of Fallout 4. You can catch the start of that series of videos early, while earning other cool perks like having your name on the screen and helping me to continue making videos like this one by joining as a channel member or patron. If you liked this video, make sure to let me and YouTube know by hitting the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss out on future videos. That's all I've got for now. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.